we're going to talk a little bit about what is an MCP server, why we went ahead and built this. Yeah. We're going to take you through kind of the key aspects around how we think about design-informed code generation. Oscar's going to go deep and share a bunch of tips and tricks on how to best optimize working with MCP server. We're also going to dive into a bit of a walkthrough of how it actually works. And then we'll probably have, hopefully, a bit of time for Q&A. So without too much more ado, we'll dive into everything. And I kind of thought I'd just kick in with a bit of an introduction because it's really kind of an interesting moment in design and development. And one of the things that sort of stood out to me really is that today making things has never been easier. And for us at Figma, we find this, it's a really exciting moment. And I hope you're all equally exciting. Thinking about it, once you've kind of drawn, probably prompted your way to a prototype and then you've brought that back and designed it. The key question that we kind of look to answer at the moment is, well, how do you align your production code to that original design intent that you had when you put it all together? And the world has kind of changed. So how do we take advantage of all of that new AI tooling that can build code? And how do we look to use those capabilities to remove friction as we are moving from design over into production code? At Figma, we really kind of thought about this firstly by saying, well, you need to start by removing the miscommunication between teams. And to help do this, to bring design and dev closer together, we originally started a couple of years back by building out dev mode. And dev mode really was us going ahead and creating this space for developers in Figma. It's designed to help with the handoff process. It's designed to make it easier for developers to have a way to inspect, interact, and understand the designs. Because I guess traditionally we've always seen a little bit of a silo effect between design and code. So on top of dev mode, to amplify the whole value there, we went out and built Code Connect. Yeah. And Code Connect is all about how do we reduce that effort on the part of the developer or the engineer to be able to see, interact with the designs and to use all of the existing design system code base, because it provides that connection between your libraries in Figma and your code in your code base, linking those components between the libraries and the representation of those components in code, which is absolutely fabulous for humans. But one of the things that we have now in the world really is we have this world of AI. So today we have this world in which code editing, traditional environment for your developers, now embeds AI code generation. So we talk about those as AI agent. So dev mode MCP server is designed to ensure that the patterns and all of the intent and the hard work you put into your design is not going to be lost when we are translating code, now that we've shifted over to a model where we have not just a developer, but often AI tools that are doing that code generation. So it sits between Figma and your developers in their code editors, and it works by sharing context with the AI agents that they have, like Cursor or Copilot, in their IDEs that they are using to translate that design into code. So it doesn't do the code generation. It provides all of that rich information about the design to the tools within the IDEs that are doing the code generation. So let's have a little bit of a think about, I guess, MCP and where we're coming from in a code generation world. So to go back to this idea, what is an MCP server and what is the Figma MCP server? Well, dev mode MCP server is built to provide design intent and Figma context to large language models so that they can do and generate design-informed code. There's a bunch of tools out there. Oscar, there's a plethora of them out there that do some form of code generation and give you some kind of decent UI. Yeah. I couldn't count them. I don't have enough toes and fingers to be able to count them. Too many. And they do a decent job. There's so many of them. They'll give you a end product that looks decent. But when we think about what has happened recently with the introduction of agentic coding tools like Copilot, like Cursor, we see now that we're adding that code-based context can be provided to those tools, to the LLMs. And this is all about how do we allow better code to be generated that is aligned to those existing patterns that you have in your code base. So think here how you've expressed your design system and the componentry you have within your code base. So that's great because that gives you a better result. But what we like to also think about here is this idea that Dev Mode MCP server, we're adding all of that design context into the mix, whereby the AI tool uses that when it's going and generating code. So now we have both the code context and the design context coming together. And that means from Figma, we're providing all of the component information, the variables, screenshots, assets, the underlying code representation. All of this context around the design is provided via MCP server. Yeah. And ideally, we're going to get closer to writing production grade code because we have a broader and better context by which it's using to generate. I also kind of like to go back and think about one other thing. So I think most teams have put a lot of effort into making sure that the way they express designs, the way they structure and have patterns in their design files are built out in a way that helps, for instance, human developers to understand the design intent to easily translate that design over into code. And it's really important to understand that all of those sorts of activities that you do in your files today absolutely translates when we use MCP to provide that information to an AI code generating tool. The example I like to use is your layer names are going to be important. Luckily, we've also given you an AI tool recently to build out all your layer names, but those are the types of metadata that provide context that get us closer to the code that we want using these AI tools. So why did we do this? Why did we go ahead and build it? I think going back a while now, we kind of asked a question and pretty much almost unanimously, if I can say that word, developers came back when we asked, hey, what is the one thing you wish that you could do in Figma? And they said they would like to have in Figma improved and robust code generation. Yeah. To reduce all of that back and forth that they still need. Dev mode solves a lot of that back and forth, but there's still a lot of human back and forth. So how do we improve the code generation? And when we looked at the market, the reality is today developers are using AI. This screenshot with the code assistance percentage at 74 is kind of old. It's probably 3 or 4 months out of date. And I would guess that percentage is way higher at the moment. So the reality is, in terms of our engineering and development processes, that AI code generation is now an embedded part of that process. Critical for us then is how do we support and provide the context of design to those AI tools in the same way that we have before to human developers. And the key thing here is what we're doing is introducing efficiency into that process. Yeah, and supporting the efficiency gains you get out of having AI coding tools. So previously, there still is a lot of human interaction as we go through that translation of design into code. When you looked at some of those AI tools that you have out there, a lot of those are really starting from a screenshot kind of point of view. Yeah, dropping a screenshot into an AI tool and expecting it to build out the end result, which is, to be honest, it's a bit like saying, hey, build me a dashboard, it's kind of vague. Yeah. You're not giving it the information about what's behind every component on that screen, the structure, the logic, the intent. Yeah. And it's not going to be tied inherently to your design system. And so really, we're moving from this idea of inspecting layer by layer where developers had to look at everything to really giving all of that layer by layer information so the developers just have to select a frame in Figma and then have the AI agent in their IDE retrieve all of that rich Figma design context and provide it as context when we're doing the code generation. And this is all about how do we give the right information to that AI agent that will use it when it's constructing code. And so we provide the context of design and code base into that. The result, we think, is cleaner, more consistent, and closer to production-ready code. And this is really what we look to achieve with Dev Mode MCP server. I'm going to trip over that all day, Oscar, constantly. But I'm actually just going to flip it over to you because I'm going to let you take it from here and dig into the whole idea of what is the best way to kind of approach design-informed code.
Yes, please. Now, let me just get my screen. I'll bring this one up. Full. Alrighty. That's all come through, Duncan? You can see design-informed code generation.
Looks good to me.
Looks good. Alrighty. Perfect. So let's talk about some design-informed code generation. But let's start from a baseline first. So, one sec. There's three kind of approaches now that we have. The first is traditional dev mode with no AI, nothing else around it. And this is fantastic. This is a great starting point for any organization that's looking to kind of ease the friction between that designer to developer handoff. However, we can improve upon this as Duncan has outlined. We can go from just dev mode to dev mode alongside the MCP server. Now, the important thing to understand is the information within here, it's the same. It's the same info, but instead of an engineer capturing it with their eyes and copy and pasting and putting it into an IDE, instead the MCP server is being called by a cursor, Copilot, whatever you may be using, and the LLM is fetching that information for you in an object, in a structure of data that it understands a lot better than the existing sort of API endpoints that we have. But as Duncan outlined before, the MCP server isn't doing anything. It's not creating any changes or AI. It's got no AI in it. It's just simply an endpoint for data to be consumed. The reason this is really important is that if you're working at a large enterprise organization that maybe has restrictions on AI and every AI tool has to go through a very thorough security vetting process, you're still able to use this because this is not an AI product. It integrates with your AI products. So if your organization has already approved the use of something like Copilot or Cursor, you can use this tomorrow. You can just start using it because it's not AI information. Now we can make that even better as well. So if we have dev mode and then we also have MCP, we can then additionally connect our design systems in with Code Connect. So once we connect those in, now we have the full context of what your code base looks like, all of the different components that are there. So rather than just giving you hints that are styling based or variable based or token based, we can just give you the exact React component that you need. And more importantly, we can give that context to Cursor, for example. So now it knows every time I'm going to render a button, I know where the button is in the code base and I know how to use it and when to import it, which is awesome. So if we go next from here, this is the traditional dev mode and lots of fantastic information here. You can see we're building a little login form on the left-hand side, and we've got some variables about spacing. The SDS is the simple design system that we have internally. So we've got our simple design system with some spacing. We've got some annotations on there, and on the right-hand side, we've got the full layout breakdown with our colors, all variables, all tokenized, fantastic information, and a very well set up environment here. Now, typically I would be manually jumping between and grabbing this information, but instead I can lean on the MCP server and I can select what I'm about to build and tell it can you help me implement my Figma selection? And all that context, all that information that we just looked at that I can consume as a human is now available to my LLM in a manner that it understands really, really well, and the most efficient way that it can consume that information. So now I can go and reuse these tokens, these variables to build something production spec. Now, the difference here is when we start to use Code Connect as well, which integrates your design system. And this image here is a great kind of description of the difference between the two. We've got the exact same design on either side, but you can see that inspect panel on the left-hand side with no Code Connect enabled is providing us these variables, the layout, all very helpful stuff. But typically it's more helpful when you're building a lot of those primitive or base level components, such as a button or a carousel or a card. Usually you're using those sorts of styles to build the core components. But if I was to be building a page, I'm not going to rebuild the button again. I want to use the button that I've already built and already extracted these styles for. So that's what we see on the right-hand side. I've configured Code Connect now. So when I'm rendering the layout here and I can see the inspect panel, rather than getting raw CSS, I'm actually getting the React code that needs to be used to generate exactly what I'm looking at because it has that full context now. And as you can see, rather than giving me generic CSS, we've got a dialog with the type of a card, we've got a text heading, text, it even knows where to import it from, and it understands the variants and the props that need to be passed into the React component. So overall, it just makes this process a lot more productive because I can get started very quickly with some production level code right now. Now, one thing to understand as well is Code Connect doesn't have to be used just with MCP. You can set up Code Connect and it will uplift your dev mode regardless of MCP usage. And then when you add on MCP, you're ready to roll and you've already got all that fantastic context available to you straight away. So it's all about starting with the right context. We can see in this particular design file, we've got all our CSS files on the right-hand side and all our styles. And we can actually lean on the MCP server here to extract all of these styles directly into the platform for us. If we maybe want to store all our styles in a single index.css file, it's a simple example, but I'm now calling to the MCP server saying, hey, build out a index.css file that has every style that I'll need for my application based on what you can see in Figma. And now it's gone and generated that for me. And you can see colors, text, background, borders, body, all of this has been generated for me by extracting it out of Figma. And you can do this consistently if things maybe fall out of sync or you need to change something in design and update it in code. You can just run this same call to make sure you're always running up to date with the most accurate source of truth. Now, this slide is pretty funny. Why context matters. So we've got make me a PB&J, one on the left without MCP server, one on the right with MCP server. The argument I'll make here is neither of them are a PB&J. That's ketchup. That's not even the right thing. So this is already wrong. But we can get a better variation here. So on the left-hand side, we've got bad. Technically, it made a PB&J, but it's not really what we were hoping for. Whereas the one on the right, when you have the MCP server, you have the context, you have better descriptions, better annotations, more strict guidelines for these LLM tools, we get a better looking PB&J, even though it's been using ketchup, but that's something we can fix later on.
I'm going to jump in here for a
Shoot. Oh, you're on mute.
PB&J, slightly American term. I think we're talking about a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, aren't we?
Yes.
Good, good. Do you like those, by the way?
Well, it's the thing. Americans, I think they call jelly what we call like Jello, like fridge Jello, like air
Jam.
jelly. But I think it's actually jam, right? PB and jam. I like
Yeah.
a jam.
Just thought I'd jump in because not everyone knows what a PB&J is.
Yeah,
But
that's a good point for the audience. It's a cultural difference. I think we're talking about peanut butter and jam, so strawberry jam and a bit of peanut butter, delicious.
yeah, I will just go out on record and say would never eat one. But let's move
Oh,
on.
get over, mate. I get them at the cafe near me all the time. All right, let's talk tips and tricks. So, and also, if you're wondering, are we going to see this thing in action? Yes, you are. I'm laying the groundwork. I'm laying the groundwork now. You get the full context. Then when you see it, you're going to know how it works better than I do. So let's talk tips and tricks for the dev mode MCP server. Number one, above all else, is structure. And Duncan alluded to this earlier. Your naming of your layers, how you structure your components, all of this is going to be very, very important context when we go to actually call the MCP server. So as a little example, we've got this here, and you're looking, you go, those are two forms, two login forms, and they're identical. Well, they're visually identical, but under the hood, they are very, very different. So if I jump to the next slide, you're going to see that the one on the left, fantastic, beautiful, Renaissance style painting. It's got all the right input fields. It's got named layers. That button down the bottom and the star, they're actually using existing components. So everything's been referenced. Fantastic. This is what we want. The one on the right is using squares to make the sign-in button. It's just a rectangle. Nothing's named. There's no structure. It's just a flat image. This is not helpful stuff for an LLM to be able to build your page. So when I run a build request to Cursor and I say, hey, build these, the output's going to be very different depending on which one of these I use. And as you can see, one of them gives me what I want, the other one gives me spaghetti. So this is a very important thing to know, is that the more structure you put into your design systems, your components, the more variables you adopt, the more like semantic ways of building things, it's going to pay dividends, not only just from an ease of use and from people being able to understand your designs better, but also machines being able to understand your designs better and be able to help those engineers write code much, much faster. So better structure, better results. Great rule of thumb. Now, if we go to the next section here, when I call to my MCP server and I said, hey, build this for me, this is some of the code that it's actually gone and built. It's made a div, it's put the class names in, it's even given it a data name, which is good. We've got a data annotation for an input or a button or an input field. And this is fantastic, but we can make it better. If we use Code Connect, instead of us, styling things from scratch and using just raw HTML, it's now, instead of creating a button or creating an input field, it's reusing the input field component we have in the platform already. It's using the button component we already have. It understands the variants, the styling, how to pass props to it. This is exactly the sort of code you would be writing in production because it's got all that context there. It knows what your production should look like.
Yeah. And this is a great question here, Oscar, because it's popping up in some of the bits and pieces here. Yeah. Because, and correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, what we're providing through MCP is really the Code Connect map that provides the pointers to all of that code base to the generational tool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, you keep going.
I was just going to say, I just saw a question asking if MCP was able to grab code via Code Connect. It absolutely is. That endpoint is there. Essentially, it just changes the results of the existing calls to have more context within them. So you're still using the same MCP endpoint calls. It's just the data that comes back is a little bit different.
Perfect.
Awesome. Alrighty. Now, let's move on to the next part of these tips and tricks. Variables. Very simple. I've kind of outlined it, but I think it's good to cover. Variables work with code too. So if you have your code syntax, you can customize how that syntax should be coming out. But in the first place, you really, really want to set up these different variables for benefits beyond MCP. It just makes your whole Figma design system a lot easier to use. So absolutely look at setting those variables up. And then once those variables are configured, we can now pull them into the MCP server and make those calls and get the correct variables that we actually need. Now, I did see one question that I thought is a great thing to call out right now is just how does Code Connect know what component library I am using? That's a setup process. So it's almost like writing a storybook file. So you would have your file alongside your button, and it would be a Figma spec file that allows us to know what the component looks like. And then you run an npm command that publishes that link to Figma. There's some documentation on it that we can share in the end, but we're able to now kind of push that information automatically up. But you do need to just write a little spec file. We're working on a way to make this a little bit easier right now internally as well, but that's what the process looks like. Awesome. So high level, essentially Code Connect, you go through all your components in Figma and then your components in code, and you would have a matching file for each, and it maps it all together. And that's how it knows which component is which design in the platform. Brilliant. Well, maybe we should talk about annotations, Duncan.
Oh, I love talking about annotations. And actually, there were some questions earlier, like before, where it was talking about somebody was asking, well, how do we think about, the accessibility components or aspect when we're doing not we, but the code tools are doing the code generation. So if you just keep moving through, so I kind of really like the idea of annotations. So when I think about annotations, it's like it's all the ways that we provide that additional information, that whole kind of context to developers to better understand what we've expressed in the design file. Whether that is information about the content, where it's going to come from, or in the example here, it's like, well, how are we going to sort, order, and build out this list of blogs on the page? Yeah. What are the details around the types of interactions that we want to have when someone kind of interacts with one of the line items in the list? But all the way down here, the bottom here, and this is always my favorite, it's like, well, how do we actually then tell or provide instructions around, like, how are we going to do things like where do we draw the alt tag from for the images that we're using here? So all of that information that we want to do that provides additional, I think, instruction and context around how we are going to do the accessibility aspects of the build. So this is one of the other cool things that comes through now from a MCP server. It's all of that information that you capture in annotations now flows through MCP to whatever particular tool you're using to do code generation. And this is kind of, again, I kind of like it. To me, it often sort of talks to this idea that you're providing the same kind of context to the code generation tool as you would to a human developer to assist them in being able to accurately build out what your original design intent was. Does that make some sense to you, Oscar?
I think that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense, Matt. I think the way I've been describing it as well is that Figma is excellent at capturing the UI of the platform and how the UI should appear. But we sometimes need additional context to understand the UX of how it should be interacted with, how it should behave, how things should change. And you can't do that with a static image. You kind of need a description of what should happen. So having these annotations and these different varying annotations of style, content, interaction, accessibility, that provides that additional level of context to the platform. Awesome. So let's have a look. Let's actually have a look at generating something here. So I'll give you a little walkthrough of just a recording of going through this and what the output looks like and kind of how it behaves under the hood. Everyone ready? All right, perfect. So let's get started. I've got this blogs page. I'm in dev mode. We've got my MCP server running. You can see it on the right-hand side. I've got it enabled and I'm spitting out React and Tailwind in this case. Now, I want to build this blog page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus in on specifically this page. And you can see there's some reusable components here. That header is actually a header component. We've got Code Connect. That little tag is also a tag component. So we don't need to build things from scratch here. We've already done a lot of the groundwork. And it's telling us that the blog content is stored in our CMS. We're using Payload CMS. And that there's some interactions that these rows should change color as we go through. So let's just select this design. And now we're in my IDE. We're using Cursor. And I'm going to tell Cursor, help me create a new blog page from this selection I have in Figma. And all I'm doing is just pasting in the link of what I'm trying to build, telling it where I want it to build into the page.tsx. And now it's going to make some calls to this MCP server. The first one is going to be get the code. So get that code connect information. And we can see as it's returned back, we have all the import statements, the different layout that needs to be returned. But more importantly, to Duncan's point earlier, we have those annotations in the MCP server, annotation interactions. All of these annotations are available. We can even return an image to the MCP server so it knows what it has to look like and what the structure is. And now your LLM, whether it be Cursor, whatever it may be, has all that context available. And we can actually see it's built this page out. It's using Payload for our CMS. It's doing these correct calls. It's matching our Figma designs. It's using our design system variables and styling. And it's even added in navigation to this Next.js project. So we actually have real production level code being generated now by our LLMs when converting designs. And this is what it actually looks like. We've got that hover animation. It's got all the data there. It's using that existing nav item. All of this is now actually production level code, which is what we're trying to get to. You just needed to have all of the different pieces connected together. Awesome. Now I can see a question that just came in saying, how would you connect the MCP server if you didn't have Cursor? You need some sort of LLM to connect the MCP server to. So it doesn't have to be Cursor. It could be Copilot, Claude Code, Windsurf, whatever it may be. But there's got to be some sort of endpoint, some sort of LLM that calls to the MCP server, because we directly can't call to it. You need some sort of LLM to call to the server itself. Excellent. Now, let's talk about some rules to help assist. It will work with Gemini, by the way. Now, from here, let's talk about some rules and some sort of guidelines for how you may want to use this MCP server. So rules can actually be documented in your application. And when you think of rules, this is a way for you to tell your LLM how it should behave or how it should treat your designs, or rules that it should behave in, almost like you would tell a junior developer, being like, hey, when you're building this, always be careful to make sure that you don't set it up like this. And we will always want to use this button, not that button. And these two buttons can never be used on the same form. Things that you just know that aren't visually evident, you can pass that in. So MCP rules. So you can instruct the agent to align its output with all of your existing code patterns. So you have a code base integration. We can tell it the layout and style so it knows what sort of layout and style info it should be using, such as using layout components from like a layout TSX file. We can even tell it data sources. Hey, don't use mock data. We have an endpoint for this. So please use the endpoints for these pages. And what this looks like is this is an actual guidelines file that one of our developer advocates, Jake, has written for our simple design system. And you can see it's detailed. It outlines where things are, how to use them, the different rules, the conventions. This is fantastic because you can then use this guidelines file, pass it to your LLM each time you make a call, and now it's been given that context. So additional, on top of Code Connect, you can add even more guidelines for it to use about your existing project that maybe Code Connect isn't aware of. So if you want to do this and you've never done one before, you haven't created a design system sort of rules file or a guidelines file, but you're using the MCP server, we've got a call for you. So if you need help getting started, you can just call the create design systems rules endpoint, or you can just say to your LLM, use the design system rules endpoint to create me a guidelines file, and it will create one from scratch. And then just, you can roll it out from there. That's what I've been doing in my projects. And then I make some variations, update things as I need to. But that's the way to go. Perfect. Now, troubleshooting. AI, it's new. MCP servers are new. There's maybe some things that you might get stuck on. A lot of these solutions are very, very simple. So, maybe the tools aren't loading. Turning the MCP server on and off, or turning your the MCP server off in something like Cursor and then just trying again seems to fix it more than you would expect. In case you're wondering where the MCP server actually sits, it sits in the desktop app for Figma. So when you're running your local development and you're calling the MCP server, you're just calling locally to your Figma app. So you need to have the Figma app up and running and make sure it's not crashed or anything along those lines. Now, it's stuck or it's too slow, you may be trying to do too much at once. So just try and keep something simple and start small and then build your way up, or reset the context in your LLM. If you got code instead of variables, make sure to tell your LLM when you're using it to use the variables from Figma. Sometimes it won't make the call if it's not requested to. Depends on the LLM. Some of them are smart enough to always do it. But if it doesn't, you can then just tell it, hey, I need you to get those variables for me, or those tokens for me. And if the server gives a 500, you might want to check the logs in your editor. This can tell whether it's an LLM issue or a Figma issue, just to go through. Awesome. Now, some of you may have seen Duncan and I recently in our webinar about MCP and Make. This is probably the second time you've seen us in a month. And I think it's good to talk about Make, because Make is our AI code generation. And you might be going like, why do you have Make and then also have MCP? Two different use cases. Dev mode, the MCP is for developers and it's to bake into your existing workflow. It shouldn't change things too significantly from a day-to-day. It's just your output should become much higher, but it shouldn't adjust the way you work too much. It's integrating into your code bases. Figma Make, very different story. Figma Make is about prototyping. It's about pulling in design systems and creating things completely from scratch and ideating quickly. It's giving engineering level code output to PMs and to designers for them to create things that are real as they create new ideas or new parts of the platform. It can be used by developers, but I feel like developers are more at home using something like MCP. Now,
That was the next question I was going to get you to answer, Oscar. But
oh,
I'm
I bet you
gonna
to it.
you beat me to it because like I think that was one of the questions asked. Folks, if you do have questions, one of the great things would be if you pop those questions in the Q&A. It's a little hard to keep track of all the questions that are flowing through from both the chat and the Q&A. So the Q&A is indeed the place for questions so that we can also follow up afterwards if we don't have time to cover all the questions today. So Oscar, are you ready? I'm gonna throw some questions at
Well,
you.
I might
Yep.
I might just quickly go to the ones that I had them flagged up before, and then I'll bang some of these out, and then we can go through any of the ones I missed.
Fab. And then I'll mark them off as we go through.
Yeah.
Go.
So one of them was, is there support aside from React for MCP? Absolutely, there is. You can also write your own sort of transformers for how you want the information to come out as. But yes, it does support more than just React. You can generate things into Swift UI if you're on mobile, for example. There's another question saying, last time you checked, MCP was unable to grab code via Code Connect. It absolutely can. You just need to have Code Connect enabled. This is a great question. This is, will the generated code be semantic and accessible by default? So we're trying our best to get these models to output that sort of semantic HTML. But since the MCP server is just providing the information, it's very much up to how the LLM wants to build the page. A lot of them are good at building accessible and semantically correct outputs. But again, those guidelines files will be very helpful in making sure that it does spit out semantically correct HTML.
Yeah. Look, it's such a good point to kind of re-stress that, like, I think there's some questions here also talking about, hey, which tool is best to produce the code? Yeah. And I think the thing to remember that from a Figma scope, yeah, we are all about providing that context to the tool of your choice or what might be approved in your organization for use. Yeah. I think one of the things I like about this approach is we're not locking you into using a particular form of code generation. Yep, those tools are going to evolve over time. Some may be better at certain types of code generation than others. The critical thing for Figma to do is to provide all of that design context to the code generation tool of your choice for the language that you want to use. So we probably can't answer the questions around which one is better, because we are all about providing the context to the tool of your choice.
There's another great question I just saw from Ajmal Hassan saying, when we are translating a design systems designed in Figma to code in a React UI library, how should we build the various variants or states for a component? So if you have a button that has an outline variant and a ghost variant, how do you pass that into the MCP server? You do it the way you would be doing it in Figma if you're following all the conventions. You would have your Figma button, and then within the button itself, it would be a component with different variations. So it can have different inputs. Maybe it's got the size variation, has icon as a boolean, something along those lines. And then when you have all those variations, you'll have these separate components. You select the whole frame with all of the different button variations, and you can just say, build this button for me to your LLM, and it will understand all the different variables and props that need to be built out as well. So just follow the best practices for building components in Figma, and that will flow into your MCP servers. Awesome.
There's a
Now
lot of
there's a question.
questions. You
Yeah,
dive
there's a
in.
lot of questions
Where are
coming in.
you
This
going to
is great. Yeah,
go?
this is fantastic. So one of them is it mandatory to have an IDE and Figma running on the same system? For now, yes. In the future, we're going to have ways for that to not be a limitation. But you will currently need to have your IDE and Figma desktop app running alongside each other to be able to make use of the MCP. Awesome. Just getting some more questions. This is unrelated, but I thought I would just cover it off. They're asking about Lottie files and animations within Figma. I can't say too much here, but there will be a solution to that in the near future, which is very, very, very cool.
Yeah. Hey, look, there's another question here where it's kind of talking about, again, talking about that idea that, hey, there's a lot of organizations, particularly government, where there's strict rules that limit or block the ability to connect to external sources. Yeah. So do you want to just go back over that for a moment in terms of what are the requirements in terms of setting up and using MCP for a sec?
Yeah, so to actually set up and use MCP, all you would need is you need to have your Figma designs. You
Yeah.
can do it without a design system and without all those components, but you lose a lot of the value. So you want to have a design system, you want to have your variables, your tokens. Then once you have a design in Figma, what you need is to have the Figma app running on your
Hmm.
desktop, and you need to have some sort of LLM assisted tool, Claude
Yeah.
Code, Cursor, Windsurf, Copilot, Gemini, whatever it is will then call to the MCP server. So you set up a little file. It's very simple. The documentation I've posted in the chat, and you just pull it through, and then it does the rendering of your components and the writing of the code. But all you need is Figma in the desktop app and an IDE with some sort of AI tool in it, and
Mm.
you're up and running.
Yeah. And I think the key thing there is obviously like if your engineering and development partners have approval to use some form of AI code generation, which like realistically, I think many do, most would too these days. MCP isn't going to be something else that you have to get a go and approve because it's not doing those external callouts. It's not going to be blocked by anything. It's running local on your machine. You're just interacting with the tools that you have on your machine and then Figma as a server.
Question from Michael Hollick, and it's a good question. He's asked, what if I already have React components pre-built alongside my Figma components? Should I regenerate them from Figma designs again? You don't need to do anything like that. You don't need to regenerate anything for the MCP server. The MCP server is simply just a new endpoint to receive information from. So you don't need to regenerate anything. What you may need to do if you haven't already, and Michael, you might want to, or Mikhail, you might want to look this up, is get Code Connect set up. So Code Connect will just be a file that sits along your existing React components. You've already built them and just tells Figma this React component belongs to this design file in Figma. That's all it is, but you don't need to regenerate anything or along those lines. You just need this spec file. And there is some documentation I put in the chat earlier that explains how to do that as well. There was a good question that was thrown before.
I know there's so many. It's quite the scroll
Yeah,
to
I
get to the ones that we really want to highlight here.
Please. Okay, let me just start. Okay, so this is a good question. How does dev mode use our project or product data? It doesn't. We do not pull in any of your product data or your project data. It's simply design information. It's just going to give your LLM the design info to build the component. If you want your LLM to also use production data, in those queries, you should tell it, hey, we have everything stored in this database. This is how we query it. And it will combine those queries with your designs to build out the page itself. But we're not providing any of that sort of production data at all. Can we instruct to use Tailwind CSS? Absolutely, you can. That's what we've natively built it to run on. Tailwind is probably the best output right now, which is fantastic. Just going through these. Wow, I have never had this many questions in the webinar.
Hey, there's one here that I think you'll love to answer. Can we use MCP to define our components and keep it as a library DSM for dev like Storybook? What would you say there, Oscar?
Yes, absolutely. You know what you actually can use? You can use Storybook, and then you can also have an extension on the Storybook file that Figma can piggyback to set up Code Connect as well. So you're kind of knocking out two birds with one stone with one file. But yes, absolutely you can.
Yeah. There is a bunch of questions here about talking about different ways of going, I think, from code back to design. Yeah. There's a bunch of discussion here in a couple of questions around, hey, can I use it in the context of make? Which I think we've kind of answered because we really think about make as like, how do you use it to do prototyping in a richer format? Yeah. MCP is really about how do you take those finished designs, yeah, and optimize the transition of those designs as you go through and translate into code for your production environment. Yeah. It's not about taking code back into design, whether that's in a make context or any other context. It's really facilitating all of that design information going through into your code generation tools. So I just want to clear that one up and I'll throw it back to you, Oscar. What's the next question we
Yes.
should tick off
So
the list?
there's one that I quite like, which is there a way to do entire flows rather than a single page at a time?
Yeah.
An onboarding flow with 5 screens. Yes, absolutely. You can pass in more than one. The thing that will be the limitation here is not Figma, it'll be the LLM and the context window that it has. What I would recommend doing if you're building out a new flow is to start with one page, build it, and then provide the next design and say, add this to the next flow, add this to the next flow, and just kind of extend it from there. Trying to one-shot it, the LLMs can be a little bit overwhelmed. Figma can provide all the information, but the LLMs can sometimes get a little bit hairy at that point. Awesome. This is a good question as well. It's asking around where there may be slight differences between design and dev for a component. So something like a select may be a single component within Figma, but you may have a select in code and then a multi-select in code that both serve the same design. With this, we do support this sort of use case. And what really helps there is a sort of guidelines file that tells the LLMs when to use each different sort of select file in that case. Okay, now I'm just going to keep going through this list. Designing entire flows. Yep, we've done that. Figma. So you can access Figma by the browser, but you cannot access the MCP server by the browser. You need to have the desktop app running. Now, there's a question that's come up a couple times here, which is the best platform for integrating MCP into which IDE or which LLM? It changes every day. These LLMs are all being updated each day. The platforms underneath them or built on top of them are all shifting. We use a variety of different LLMs at Figma for our make output and for a lot of our different AI tooling. So I think it's great to not just stick with one, but to try vary it and see how it spits out the information as well. But a lot of them, I will say, are all pretty bloody good right now. They're pretty great. That one I've answered previously, which is can we host the MCP server in a cloud provider? Currently, no. We are looking at external hosting, but currently you would have to have it running as a desktop app. Just reading through some of these now. Does the quality of the code generated depend on the tool? Absolutely. But like, Copilot or Cursor, but it is very much, the standard is extremely high across all of these different tools now, so you shouldn't notice too much variation between, but I'd recommend experimenting with a few different ones. This is a great one. Would the Figma MCP also take note of the interactions set up in interactive components? Yes, that's what those annotations are for. So those annotations that Duncan was talking about with different components and being able to say, interaction annotation, that's where you would put that information, and that would be sent back in these requests to the MCP server. To your LLM. So it would understand not only how the component is meant to appear, but how it should behave and be interacted with as well. This is a good question. Does it need to be an elaborate design system in place, or can we just use it on the components directly in the Figma file? You don't need an elaborate design system. If you're building something simple and you don't have a full design system, you can still absolutely use the MCP. The MCP server works bare bones. However, the more context you can provide it, design systems, variables, components, all of this code connect, the output becomes much more helpful, but you can still use it bare bones. There's no restrictions around that. Yes. So is there any reference Figma designers should follow for responsive code generation using MCP? Just the ones that I outlined earlier around the structure and the naming being incredibly important. I think designers need to be aware of that now that a lot of their designs are going to be fed directly into an LLM tool. Naming and structure will be really, really pivotal. We also have a document on our blog about how to interact with AI tooling, even in Make, like the best way to prompt things. That carries over to MCP as well, and I can share that as well towards the end of this. Awesome. I've already answered that question, so that's great. This is a good one. Do you plan to allow designs from Make to be exported as frames in Figma and then connected with MCP? Yes. Yes, we do. And we plan on doing that very soon. That's currently being worked on. Leaked.
There's also look, there's a whole range of questions here that also kind of talk to, well, hey, what do I need to do on the design side to kind of make sure that I am doing a really good job of setting it up to be well connected into what I have from a code side? One of the things I would highlight is, of course, next month we have an additional webinar Hopefully you could just go forward and we'll provide some QR codes so you guys can jump in and have a look at these. But we have one in particular where we are going to be talking about all of the abilities that we have in terms of how do we think about building your design system, specifically what you need to do there to better align it with your code outcomes and make sure you have clarity in the connections. That's coming up next month. And we'll forward in the slides shortly to give you the QR code so you can jump ahead and register for that, because I think that question kind of pops up fairly often here. It's a detailed question. There's a whole webinar on it, so we probably won't have time to answer all of those questions for you today. So in the 5 minutes remaining, Oscar, what do you think? There's a lot of questions. Where do we go?
I'm trying to answer some in the chat in the meantime, but sorry, I'm just finishing one of these messages now. So let me just go to the next thing here. Sorry, I just wanted to quickly answer one of the questions that was outstanding that was great. Where did it go? They're all coming through so quickly.
There's a question here from someone who's anonymous. Yeah. And he says, what does this mean for design system creation? Because this is a really interesting question. Does this mean that designers will have to learn a new way to create components and variables that AI can consume? And how much will it differ from existing best practices? I think this is the key thing. So everything that you do today, yep, to assist in that translation, yeah, for human developers, yeah, that is absolutely the context that we are providing over into the AI tooling. Yep. And under the covers, we are further enhancing the way we model and store that data and provide it through MCP to better take all of that information and share it with the LMMs that are doing the code generation. So the answer is no. All of your best practices, everything that you do today to do essentially hand off to a human, applies just as much here. So you're not going to have to learn a new language. Do what you're doing today.
Yeah, spot on. If you're following best practices, it's just better for the LLMs. It's better for a human brain and it's better for a machine's brain as well. If you're building things with variants and different colors and different variables and tokens, all of that is just going to be passed down to the LLMs in a way that they'll understand. Okay, what else have we got? Yeah, so this is just a quick one around Code Connect. In VS Code, there's an extension named Figma for VS Code. That is not the same thing as Code Connect. Code Connect is a specific tool that you have to set up. It's made by Figma. I put the documents in the very top of the chat earlier on, but yeah, Code Connect is not like a plugin into VS Code. It's an actual it's a command line tool that needs to be run. One question is it important to install Code Connect for MCP? And I kind of covered this, but it will add a lot of helpful context and make MCP more valuable, but you can use it without for now and then look at getting Code Connect set up later.
Yeah. I think we're going to have to wrap up now. Any last questions you want to pick off that very long list that we have, Oscar?
Let me see. My God, they keep coming in.
I know it's been a little hard to keep up. Apologies, people. The questions are flowing in very rapidly. We're trying to get
Copilot does work with this, as one of the questions that just came through. Copilot does work with this. Webflow, I imagine no, because I don't think Webflow is an AI LLM. I don't know if it can actually pull into MCP servers. Let's see. I might pause it there just because I do have another call straight after this at 3 o'clock. But just myself before I hand it back to Duncan, thank you everyone for joining. Really appreciate the questions. It's a fantastic result of how many of you have all turned out and made it engaging by asking some really great questions. I hope this is helpful to all of you. Feel free to find me, add me on LinkedIn, Oscar Watson Smith, obviously. I work at Figma. And yeah, thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. And with that, we'll wrap it up.